responsible for polluting by looking at the map, right? The Indonesian PM called Singaporeans crybabies, and the ASEAN Forum became gridlocked because of the source diplomatic relations which sour over the entire period. And we see, when you have number of diverse nations with that kind of conflict trying to work together, any sort of these issues can throw a spanner into cooperation. It erodes political capital for cooperation on other more important issues like aiming towards a customs union, trade-related issues, free trade agreements on services and e-commerce, which are pretty much more meaningful to sort of economic destinies of this nation. Let's face it, right? ASEAN was never created to ensure regional security. It was never created to ensure regional solidarity. It was created so that you all make more money, and that's why all these countries who hate each other buy into it. Let's keep it that way.
Okay, thank you. Okay, leave. Everybody else would be a little bit left also. Is that right? Yeah. Please, friends, yeah? Thank you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's just sad. I have some positions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright, well, hit me.
Let's go bench.
Yeah, me too.
I believe actually I want to know about golf.
Okay.
For op, I thought we would have O slightly ahead. I can be swayed, but I thought that it was just so businessy over the world.
Yeah.
Annoyed me, but yeah.
Okay, so I'm actually, so I agree with the girls bench, op bench. I think I probably disagree with the
CEO.
Yeah, I think I probably at this point would give Shafiq and Rizal.
I can see why, because I think Shafiq just contradicted himself.
Yeah, and also just, so my problem is, and this is an upset points why I think it's a go bench, literally most of the arguments of the opposition were not arguments not to undertake this policy. They were arguments about why they wouldn't be deployed in every circumstance, why people wouldn't invite you in.
But they don't beat
But they don't beat the fact that there is a circumstance in the world where
there is that benefit,
they would in fact intervene. And the problem is, in the balance, right, they say, even then, we lose all this other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And nobody on that bench tells me what that other stuff is. They just keep saying economic benefits.
Yeah.
And no one, it's so ironic that the final 10 seconds of the op bench is like for example, a customs union and e-commerce.
I'm just
that's precisely the point. Your entire bench has been reliant upon you saying you will lose some negotiation capacity and there will be economic harms to that. And none of you have actually told me what they are. So it's there's no harm to the policy, which is why it's a op bench. But my problem is, I think that at least in terms of whether or not the thing would work, the CEO finally explains why they wouldn't be able to cooperate together, or alternatively why there might be alternatives that are better, e.g. that they don't have a vested interest in the conflict. And I think that to be honest, I'm not really sure at the end of
this is my issue with
beef and things.
And so beef goes. We can rely on external actors who, sorry, why are the other actors there? I'm trying to find it. People are more comfortable with said actors than with ASEAN directly. But then he also goes, besides, these external actors already utilize regional troops.
Yeah.
And then Shafiq goes, people will not trust soldiers and their deliveries, right? Who also exist in your regional troops.
Yeah.
And then he goes, these governments are going to, I'm not even a fan of the point, but just that these governments are not even going to use, are going to use the peacekeeping force as an excuse to not do anything, and then likewise for UN peacekeeping force, whatever. I don't know. I
So also
yeah.
but also what would they be doing otherwise? I think there was people come on our bench to conflate like the kind of Syria-esque situation,
Yeah.
situations we were talking about. Like obviously the government is not going to invite in a peacekeeping force. The government is in the midst of committing genocide against people. The point
But I
is,
think OG does deal with that. They're like,
I know.
they also want to see, they want legitimacy to be added to the process. So they'll have a peacekeeping force there, so that it'll look like everything is legitimate and they were steamrolling their opponents.
yeah.
And the point of OG is that they were a bit like too glib sometimes, and I couldn't quite with how they explain stuff. But it was there, they put it there,
Oh.
and they ignored.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I totally agree with that. I'm trying to have this point mechanism between.
Yeah. You know what? Fine.
No, like we should talk about it because I'm not even that convinced to see it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like it's more of all kept shooting themselves in the foot. Now if someone gives me something, then hold on.
Yeah. So like, diplomatic efforts, not useful, don't know what they are.
Usually,
They just like deny the premise of the debate.
Yes.
They're just like, no, there's no harm, there's no
yeah,
going wrong here.
sure. Usually these conflicts don't premise stability, the military and government can handle it. But that's the problem. Like people are rising up against military because it's oppressive. I can't believe they said that Rohingya thing is not good.
Yeah, I know. But like also, they just deny that we ever need to do anything.
Yeah.
But like at the point at which we do need to do something, the question is who should do it.
At least the UN they say, but
yeah, they do. But like, and on the UN they say don't have proximity, don't have a vested interest in the conflict, which I guess is kind of said at the OHO as well. They say there's no shared history or common whatever. That's Musar's speech, which about
yeah,
the
but at the point in the debate at which he's articulating that, it doesn't add much to what Misal says, but also CG questions that already. There is shared interest.
Yeah.
There's a shared desire to be anti-West or not too dependent on the West, plus shared economic refugee harms. And he goes, I don't see how refugees harm you. Moving on.
Oh yeah, that was really dumb.
Yeah.
How do refugees flows affect your economy? Oh, I don't know.
Ask Australia.
Flow a shitload of people.
Ask Alex.
That's right. Like, what is that? Yeah, I mean you're right. They really all they do is just question whether we should ever intervene anywhere or whether there's even a necessity to do anything.
Yeah.
They don't actually tell me why they're doing harm to this policy.
Yeah.
At least the OO always attempt to do like there is negotiations that are currently happening that will be stalled
And you know
without
what?
any actual example.
Yeah, that's true. And like, even if by virtue of
Being earlier.
yes, always saying it first and see not having anything, see still dies. Because then, like, at least respond to the extension. If only that. Because like there were no questions raised
Oh, I agree.
after the extension came out.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so I agree. Okay, fine. We're convinced about that. Okay. So, let's talk about the gov. Because I also. I won't.
I'm sorry.
No.
Really, me too. Sorry.
No. So, on the Gov, again, I'm not so because like I think that someone really think is good from the closing is to finally answer the question of why the alternatives are insufficient.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is that stuff about them having a direct financial incentive.
Yeah.
And to intervene.
The whole, I think they were like, we're going to be seen as dependent people, and that is a shared feeling across ASEAN.
Yeah. Precisely, and also in the context where both teams in the opening half acknowledge that it's hard to convince people to intervene in the world.
Yeah.
There's fatigue, there's
yeah.
politics, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. I think that, they answer the question of why, therefore, this is the most likely to be successful alternative, which I think to some extent breaks a little bit of the deadlock with the opening where at least the OO just they're relatively compellingly say there are alternatives. They don't prove a harm to doing this thing, but at least they throw a little bit of mud on the necessity for the policy, and I think that closing up does a good job of resolving that. OG do a really good job of just proving that there are certain circumstances in which these things would be super useful. I think there's stuff about the legitimacy of ASEAN as well, which is really compelling in the opening.
The opening analyzes it as they are seen as a talk shop, they're seen as toothless. Now people will take what they say seriously because they can back it up.
Which is not really as benefit, especially because they never actually explain why people conceiving them that way is bad, or how people conceiving them differently would be good.
Yeah.
So, even if I can believe it's true, I don't know why I care.
Yeah, why is it?
Who gives a shit?
I'm not really doing CG.
I think I am leaning to CG because it's I think that OG definitively win a niche set of circumstances
Where it
where
where people consent.
exactly where it will be used and stuff like that. But they really don't create a significant benefit in the context where the opening says that we can do almost exactly the same thing with the UN. So what is the difference? And in that context, CG actually answers the question of why this policy is
I agree.
necessary. So alright, good. And that so
I thought it was a good round one.
it was good back. Okay, so let's scoring. I think that Gov over Minerals was definitely. So 78. Given how I've been scoring here, okay. Wow.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Can we call it 79 then?
Alright,
fine. And that's very out of step with how I've been scoring. So just I can do it wrong.
No, but you've been getting over. I'm getting over too. That way from the top.
Okay. I thought that she was pretty 6. Okay. So then KK and Brian go what? 77, 37.
Yes. Might not be too low.
No, yeah, I think maybe she gets 77.
Yeah. So we can do 70.
Did you think I was better? I thought Brian was a little bit better.
Yeah.
Marginally.
Brian is easy.
Who's the second
Yes.
guy?
I thought the one after his valley I was going to
Yeah, so Kenneth is the first
So we
guy.
go
78.
78, right?
Yeah, 78.
And then
Who's always definitely better. So,
usually just undermine all his work.
yeah, and I just don't know.
I was 76 and then I don't know, 74, 73? No, not that's
No, that's outrageous.
It's only 75. I think it's only 75, right?
Or 4. I think he's at least 75 or 6 compared to what I've been seeing in those rooms.
Alright, so.
Because imagine how we're over these guys. Because they still speak well. I can't believe some
Yeah, but
all
look at
that
these scores are. What are you gonna do? You don't have much space either.
We just Alright, maybe you're right that we need to bump up.
Yeah.
No, okay. I take it all back. You're right. Yeah. Alright, he gets 80. I think she probably says it's 7.
Yeah, so 7. I don't think I 4 means
No.
yeah.
Maybe these words bump up a little bit.
I only finish.
Yeah.
Okay, then you can
79. 78.
So I would probably go 77, 76 for that. Is that fair?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah. And then these boys.
I can do it just that.
I think he gets 75. I think this guy was.
These are like 5, 6 probably.
I'm not sure. I think he gets 74.
Yeah.
I think she's so hard. Yeah, it was stupid. And 6. Okay, I'm gonna try and find. Thanks, one of you should stop. Okay, so in general, to kind of give an idea, we thought this event was pretty good, and there were some moments of very good, very insightful stuff said. That being said, we thought the division between the two benches was relatively clear. So we've given this as a Gov bench win. Within the benches, we thought it was much closer and much harder to adjudicate. So the way it's gone is the first has gone narrowly to closing Gov over opening Gov. You guys have taken the second. On your bench, the third has narrowly gone to Mick and Shaff, and you guys unfortunately have taken the fourth in this round. So the way I want to do this adjudication is first of all to explain the split between the two benches, because I think that's the clearest and kind of easiest place to start, and then to give you an idea of what happened between the teams on the benches. So, we felt like, in general, what happened in this debate is that the opposition bench problematized the extent to which this policy would be beneficial, limited the number of cases in which it would be operational or be useful, but did not prove that there weren't certain circumstances in which this policy would be useful. The problem with that is that in the context in which Shamila and I felt very much so that nobody in the opposition bench was actually able to prove a harm of engaging in this policy, we felt like despite the fact that you managed to narrow perhaps the benefits, you still didn't overwhelm them. So we felt like in general the bench A questioned whether or not there was a problem anywhere. Ultimately that was defeated. I think that the government bench proved that there were certain circumstances in which there was A, both a problem, and B, there would in fact be the capacity for us to intervene in the peacekeeping force. So simply suggesting that there was A, no problem, or B, nobody would ever agree to let us in, limited the number of cases, but certainly didn't prove that there were none. Secondly, the suggestion that there were alternative forces that could do this thing. Truthfully, it minimised perhaps the impetus for the policy, but it certainly didn't prove that there weren't circumstances in which this would be useful. Particularly, we think the closing government did a good job of proving that this force would be more likely to intervene in the international community, which we think undermined in general the logic of alternatives being sufficient. And so we thought that was a little bit of a problem. But most importantly, for the opposition bench, we really felt like you guys were super assertive about the benefits of cooperation in ASEAN that you would lose as a result of this. So even if we were to accept the logic that said it would be harder to negotiate on things like the economy within ASEAN as a result of doing this policy, you at no point attempted to actually elucidate what those benefits were. It was taken as a given that economic development was good and that it necessarily happened right now and it was reliant upon cooperation in ASEAN. And I think it was like telling for your bench, to be honest, the last 10 seconds of the whip speech were like, oh, also, here are some things we might do. E-commerce, customs union, X, Y, and Z things. Like, it was literally what was missing from your bench. Like, we did not know what the actual harm of this thing was, aside from generically perhaps losing cooperation on something, which we didn't know if it was beneficial or not, or isolating countries, we weren't sure how much more isolated they could become, what the outcomes of that thing was. So we really didn't think you proved a harm across the bench. And that, I hope, kind of explains the division between the two. To differentiate, actually, I'm going to start on the opposition bench, differentiate between the two of you. So, we think opening up, do a reasonable job at canvassing those major things that I just spoke about. Do a reasonable job at suggesting that there are alternatives that we could use, and so therefore there's not really a need to engage in this policy. And suggesting that it would be unlikely that we could reach sufficient consensus about when to deploy, or governments would be unlikely to accept these troops. So we think that by the time Miff and Shaf sit down, the scope of the debate has been narrowed, and that's true. We don't think that you guys at closing up add a particular level of detail, anything particularly new, such that we believe that there is even less cases in which this would be operational. At best, I think what you do at closing up is go even further to question whether or not there's a problem at all, which at times kind of denies the reality of the government bench. And so I think that, unfortunately, you guys are even less responsive to the kind of examples and the setup that have been given by the government bench, when you just say, essentially your logic is domestic armies can deal with these things, which just denies the entire premise of the debate and denies the premise of your bench, which is that you agree that sometimes intervention needs to occur. You just want to do it differentially. So I think that you guys don't particularly add anything to that issue. And I think that in terms of what you do add, suggesting that it would be difficult for these soldiers to work together, or more importantly, that there might be like suspicion of soldiers and the fact that they might have a particular stake in the outcome of an intervention, has already been well and truly established and won at opening up, when they suggest that there is like a strict set of confines in which this would occur, and that it would never actually lead into being an actual intervention. So I think that a lot of the logic you have actually is not responsive to things that have already been set up in the debate. And so, unfortunately for you guys, not only think you don't add a particular amount, we kind of pin you a little bit more for being even less responsive to the government bench at the point at which you had far longer to engage.